So welcome to the session on the quality of the scientific literature. I'm Ana Marušić from the University of Split School of Medicine in Croatia. And we will start with Harold Sox, who will talk about the scientific quality in a series of comparative effectiveness research studies. Harold, please.
Thank you. So far, most of the presentations have been about the results of research. This one is different. It's going to be how to do a research project. And we're looking forward to you for input. That's why I'm here. So the U.S. Congress created PCORI in 2010 to be a program of comparative effectiveness research. The law required PCORI to develop methodology standards, peer review the research, and make the research findings publicly available. These requirements have actually mean that we have to generate data with which PCORI can study the determinants of successful CER. So the purpose of this presentation is how to define the predictors and how to measure study quality. That's our focus. I've displayed here a crude model of characteristics of the PI, the proposed research, which are known before merit review, characteristics of the finished research, and finally, impact of the research. And we'll be focusing on the first two of those boxes. Now, PCORI has funded 531 studies so far. 184 of those are in peer review. The study sample is all 33 completed studies whose final report was submitted to us by February 2017. Half of these were clinical CER and half of them improving health systems. All of the studies that are going to be discussed were designed before adoption of the methodology standards. So potential predictors of study quality and impact include characteristics of the study principal investigator. The median number of federally funded awards as PI and the number of top-tier journal publications as first or last author were both one. And many PIs had 0 of these two characteristics. The PI's median H factor was 22, which means 22 publications with at least 22 citations. And finally, the median years since the PI's highest degree awarded was 20. So all in all, these first cycle studies were conducted by researchers with moderate experience. Other potential predictors of impact include characteristics of the study. Some of these, the ones that are listed first, some of these, such as the first two listed, are known before merit review, and the rest are only known after the research has been completed. 18 of the 23 randomized trials achieved at least 90% of their recruitment target, and the median follow-up rate was 90%, which is pretty good. Study results could be a predictor, but we haven't settled on a way of categorizing the results in a scientifically sound way. And finally, 5 of the 33 study sample were published in a top-tier journal, by which we mean one with an impact factor at least 15, or the journal with the highest impact factor in their specialty area. Another one that we did not show is study size. All of these studies were short and relatively small. PCORI does, however, fund large 5-year randomized trials, which we won't see for a long time. Finally, another potential predictor is methodologic quality, and that's going to be our last topic and the one that we will delve into in detail because it's the toughest one. So PCORI's methodology standards were created by PCORI's methodology committee in 2012 and were updated very recently. There are in all 48 standards in 12 categories which are listed in, oops, I've done it again, in the box here. 5 of the categories, the ones on the left, apply to all studies, and the ones on the right apply to studies with specific study designs. We think that engagement of stakeholders in the research may be an important factor in a predictor of impact, and we will be assessing adherence to our standard for this category, which is under patient-centeredness. Finally, to learn more about the assessment of adherence to the standards, which is the heart of this study, we will delve in depth into the category listed in red there, reporting research questions. Good. So this category is actually comprised of 6 individual standards, of which the one in bold is the one we will follow in depth to the instructions for assessing adherence as well as the results. Now, this particular item, if you look at it closely, you'll realize it's really it's a compound question. Does the study identify specific populations and health decisions? So a simple yes-no answer isn't going to work there. It's going to leave ambiguity. So we deconstructed it into 3 items that we really could assess with a simple yes-no question, and they are listed at the bottom. Now, some of those components, component 2 and 3, are actually conditional. If the protocol doesn't specify a health decision, then they're really not applicable. So the next slide shows the results for this particular research question. It's a complicated slide, and I think the key to it is to look at the headings. That's usually good advice. So the second heading is the second column is the question as posed in the form that the reviewers use. The third column shows the proportion of the 31 studies actually, that where the 2 reviewers disagreed. And you can see that those disagreement rates are really high, and a take-home lesson of this slide is going to be, we got problems we need to fix. The third column shows the next column shows the proportion of studies for which the question was not applicable, as it wouldn't be if the report didn't describe a health decision. And the final columns show the proportion that the reviewers did agree on, it being either a yes or a no. And clearly the main message of this slide is the rate of high disagreement. And I should mention that there will be a poster tomorrow at 2:30 led by Evan Mayo Wilson, who's one of my colleagues on this study. And for those of you who want to dig into this in depth, and I hope there will be many of you, thank you, Anna, please show up. So PCORI wants to know what factors predict a high impact study. In this presentation, we described some candidate predictors and results for a sample of 33 studies. We found that some predictors are easy to assess, like the PI's publication record, while others are difficult to assess with high certainty and are a problem that we still need to solve. So last slide, and maybe we can hold this one up during the discussion. I'm nearly done, Anna. Are some questions that we think are important. First of all, how to accurately assess adherence to a standard, and we've seen that that can be subjective and lead to observer disagreement. A second question is how to express a study's methodologic quality across so many elements. Early efforts to distill methodologic quality into a single number have lost credibility. The PCORI standards are at the opposite extreme, and I hope they're a step in the right direction. How to display the adherence results across these complex standards and then systematically relate them to what the public needs to know is a really important challenge. And finally, how should a researcher funder use data about study quality? And I'll just mention one, and that is good adherence data can help PCORI decide what additional research would address a study's specific shortcomings. So we can do a follow-up study to a study that looks promising but has an important shortcoming and fix it with the follow-up study. So thanks for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Hal. Now the questions. While we're waiting for the people to come, I just wanted to ask you about this agreement, which is similar to peer review in a way. I know the studies in peer review shows that you would have to have at least 7 reviewers to get kind of good agreement. So how do you explain it, and how do you see a resolution to this problem of agreement? Or maybe there shouldn't be agreement because maybe different experts looked at different things in a study.
Well, I think the first approach that we'll take is to try to refine the questions that that appear on the form that the reviewer uses, so that we can reduce disagreement. And we're just now starting to talk. The 2 reviewers are just now starting to talk with each other about what they thought it meant, and they thought it meant, and hopefully we'll start to make those questions, easier to interpret and to agree on. I'm discouraged to hear that you have to have 7 reviewers. I hope we can do better than that.
Thanks. Okay, next question. Can you identify yourself so that we
Joseph John, Charleston, South Carolina. Thank you, Dr. Sachs, for all that work that you have done and are doing. Your particular future questions address positive aspects of the study, what quality will come out of it in a positive way. What are your thoughts about how to address, because of study size, certain potential side effects that occur at such low rates that the study either can't address or doesn't address? So death as one endpoint, but serious side effects as others, say Guillain-Barré resulting from influenza vaccines. That seems to me always to be left in the detritus of the bottom of the paper, and that I wonder what your thoughts are addressing that issue. Thank you.
Well, I think we'll probably address those in the same way that any trial which has benefits and the harms occur very infrequently, which is to list them rather than to try to incorporate them into an analysis that would require a substantial sample size in order to accurately identify predictors of those outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Bandrowski from the RID project. Sorry.
Louder.
There we go. Bandrowski from the RID project. I wonder if you could address the ideas in your methodology. So we know that preclinical studies are missing, most of the just simple catalog numbers for the key reagents. Has your plan been to address those, and how do you do that within the reviewer situation?
Okay, the second sentence to the last, could you say it again, please?
So we know that in preclinical studies,
Yeah.
We can't identify most of the antibodies, for example, by catalog number or by any other identifying information. So that's a huge hole in most of those preclinical studies.
Mm-hmm.
But reviewers tend to not look at this very carefully. Trying to track down reagents is something that you do after the paper, and then you get frustrated, right? So I wonder if your studies are addressing these kind of very basic methodological considerations, or if you could speak to that.
So I think PCORI funds comparative effectiveness research. In general, that's clinical research. It's not basic research. And so I'm not sure that problem should be on our problem list.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, David Sklar from Academic Medicine. So I'm going to raise a question that may be a little bit awkward, but why not? So when PCORI was first started, the politics and the political environment was very different from what it is right now. And what I'm wondering is, have you adjusted some of these questions to take into account some of the shifts in Washington and potential support or lack of support of PCORI, so that it sort of addresses some of these shifting political winds?
I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at with that finely shaded question, but if you're talking about PCORI's longevity and its ability to follow these studies to completion and then on after that to see what their impact, I'll try to adjust that.
Well, so partly it's clearly the funding is at risk with the Affordable Care Act, and part of it is, I think, that at least in general, the role of government and its role as far as particularly in public health and prevention and so on is a little bit different when you have a Republican-controlled House and Senate as compared to and an administration as compared to when we had the Democrats. So I'm just wondering if that has had any effect on how you look at some of these difficult questions.
No.
And then as far as the longevity issue, obviously, I'm sure you're concerned about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, PCORI has been flying under the radar so far with the attempts to get rid of the Affordable Care Act and perhaps replace it or not. And so we're pretty optimistic that we're going to be able to live out our first lifetime, which means because the money stops flowing in July 2019, although we have the money to complete the follow-up of the studies we've already funded. So we hope to be reauthorized and are operating on the assumption that that's a realistic possibility.
Great,
Okay,
thanks.
last question there.
My name's Margaret Rogers, and I'm with the American Speech Language Hearing Association. My question goes to the area that you said you weren't going to talk about, and that is the impact and the relationship between the author characteristics, the study quality, and impact. The reason, two questions to it, if you can give us some sort of foreshadowing of how you're going to operationalize or look at impact. And then secondly, my reason for asking is that impact as a researcher, we think that if we publish, things will change, and as implementation science has now shown us, that's probably not an accurate view of the world. So I'm wondering to what extent PCORI is able, or thinking forward, to think about what sort of factors in the implementation environment also contribute to the long-term impact.
Well, PCORI is going to track various measures of the impact of its research. One of them seems pretty clear, which is we should be looking to see about the incorporation of PCORI studies into systematic reviews that drive practice guidelines, that drive practice. Establishing cause and effect relationships there is always going to be a fraught undertaking. So that's one that's fairly obvious. The other is, that I had talked about at the very end, if we get a study that looks really great but they didn't handle missing data very well, we can commission another study which looks at the same problem but does a great job of evaluating missing data and plugs that hole in our understanding of the question at hand.
Lovely, and I
Thanks.
just do want to just say half a second here.
I think can you continue afterwards, because
Certainly. My apologies.
we are
Certainly.
over time. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thanks, Herr.